All right. Hello, everyone. We are holding by the book of Leviticus, chapter 18. Again, hello, everyone. Holding by the book of Leviticus, chapter 18. We are in verse 3. This will be part 2. There'll be a part 3, part 4, I'm sure. Again, we're welcome holding by book of Leviticus, chapter 18. We are in verse 3. The Torah says, Kamai Seretz Mitzrayim, Asher Yishaftem Bo, Lo tasu maseretz Kenan, She'ani mevi eschem, Shama lo tasu b'chokoserem, lo selechu. So here the Torah says, after the deeds of the land of Egypt, where you lived, you shall not do, or after the deeds of the land of Canaan, whether I bring you, where I'm going to bring you, you shall not, or I brought you, let's say, where you shall not do, neither shall you walk in their ordinances. Right? So Rashi says, and made very clear that the deeds of the land of Egypt and the Canaanites were worse than any other nation, right? Where they resided, they were a lot worse, more corrupt. Also, when it says the land of Canaan, they'll go after their deeds, same thing, right? They were more corrupt than others. And says don't go in their ordinances, and we understood that's talking about social customs, right? Don't go to the theaters, don't go to their stadiums, race courses, whatever you want to call it. Others say it's talking about going in their ways, meaning the ways of the Amorites, right? So we spoke last week about, in general, going to sporting events and other things of non-Jews, and how it applies to Jews and non-Jews, right? According to this, should be forbidden. 100% should be forbidden. The question is, why is it forbidden? Right? I mean, it seems like it's total prohibition, but what's the real prohibition? Meaning, why would we say it's problematic? So you tell me, well, the Torah says, very good, right? Even though the Torah tells me, very good. What's the reason here? Right? There could be for a guy. Could be the biggest reason is Bittul Torah. It's wasting time when he could have learned Torah. Yeah, it could be. There are immoral things going on there as well. But even if they weren't, let's say you don't have a problem with vulgarity, you don't have a problem with immorality, you don't have a problem with any of these things, then why would it be forbidden? What would be the issue? Issue is the person wasting time when they could have learned Torah. Right? So whatever, we spoke quite a bit about that. And Rashi comes along the Ramban, comes along Nachmanides over here, and he brings down a medrash, and the medrash says also the Egyptians are steeped in immorality. And what was the immorality? They were steeped in homosexuality and bestiality, right? As we're going to see towards the end of this chapter, whenever we get there, verse 21, I think, or verse 22, right? It's going to talk about homosexuality, and then in verse 23, I'll talk about bestiality. So whatever, we'll get there. We'll get there at some point. So the Ramban over here says that the Egyptians were steeped in immorality, i.e., homosexuality and bestiality. And he said very clear that is the case. And we have a verse to tell me that in the book of Ezekiel, right? Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 26, right? Let me just bring it up here. 16:26. And the Torah there says, yeah, it says, you shall build a high place on every main street. You have made beauty to be abhorred, to be disgusted, and you offered yourself to everyone that passed by. Um, Multiplied by harlotries, so that was actually verse 25. But verse 26 here says, you have played the harlot with children of Egypt. Yeah, you're the neighbors of large flesh, and multiplied the harlotry to provoke me to anger. Right? So Ezekiel says, again in chapter 16, verse 26, right? What's it a reference to? Right? What's it a reference to? So all the commentaries pretty much agree that when it's talking about huge flesh, it's talking about, Rashi says, others say, it's talking about the male organ. So that's what it's talking about. And they were steeped in tremendous amounts of immorality. One second. Yeah, and why were they steeped in immorality? So the simple answer is because they had a very strong desire for it. But also, what do they do to get God angry? Says the Malbim, that they started to do idolatry in order to anger God. And this is why it's talking about the Egyptians over here, and this is all in the time of Achaz, King Achaz, as well. So the Metzudas David there says, interesting, they were involved in so much immorality that it wasn't always, it's impossible to say it was all for desire. Yeah, some of it for sure was desire. And the Gemara says that certainly non-Jews were given very high doses, of that desire. Let's say certainly more than the Jews, no question. So he says they acted immorally, to such an extent you can't say it was all for desire. Right? It's only so much desire a person can have. Okay. Nonetheless, he says, what was the intention? To anger God. Right? It wasn't just for the sake of idolatry. Right? Might have been part of it. Yeah, or just for the sake of immorality. But the fact, they did it so much. So he said it can't be for the sake of desire. Right? They did it in order to get God angry. Yeah. Right? They did it to get him angry. So says the Ramban over here. So the Ramban says that they were involved in tremendous immorality. Right? Again, homosexuality and bestiality. Now again, the Torah here, later, verse 22 and 23, right, which talks about homosexuality and bestiality. Interesting, by homosexuality calls it a toiva, calls it abomination, right? We call the person abomination, calls the act an abomination. Whatever, we'll speak about it. And then in verse 23, he speaks about bestiality. Very good. Right? So it comes on the Ramban. And the Ramban says that's what it means, that they were more immoral than everybody else. Right? They were steeped in homosexuality and bestiality. It brings a proof. From Yechezkel. from the prophet Ezekiel. Then it says over there, chapter 16, verse 26, that they're involved in such, immorality, right, as we mentioned. And he says further, chapter 23, verse 20, right? Ezekiel says over there, find it. Over there, doted upon her paramours there, whose members were like those of asses, whose issue was like that of horses, right? Not very complimentary. Say, basically, keep this relatively clean, right? Saying their organs, I guess, were like those of asses, and their issue, i.e., when they I guess when they had sex, their issue was like that of horses, comparing them to horses. So people bring this up all the time, saying, see, look how they talk about non-Jews. Yeah, look how negative we talk. We talk about non-Jews. Now, let me just see one thing here. Yeah, why is there, I translate here as issue, but really it means semen here. Why is it compared to a donkey? Yeah, or sorry, to a horse. Right? Why is it compared to a horse? Right? So Rashi here says that we're talking about people, this is what they do all the time. I mean, this is like not just a hobby, right? But they're overachievers, let's say. Well, let's say in this, he said the fact they do so much, more than any, it's compared to more than, even these animals, right? Even donkeys, or even what do you call it? Even horses, so to speak. So yeah, this is tremendously negative. Tremendously negative. Now, what's the purpose? What's the purpose over here? Let's see one thing here. Yeah, it says that we're gonna translate it here. So they had many lovers. I guess that's a good way to say it, it's being blunt. Yeah, so the Malbim says they needed a lot of mistresses, let's say. And this is what they did. So in other words, yeah, it's a negative comparison. Tremendously negative comparison. But why compare? Why compare to animals or these type of animals? I can say because it's what they did so much. It's what they did so much. So there's going to be a negative connotation, tremendously negative connotation. Now, someone will say, I'm sure, a lot of people will say, oh, see, who can the Jewish people do? Who can they compare us to? Who can they compare, if we have relations? They're comparing us to animals, and we're no better than animals and all that. Okay. Well, what's he saying over here? Yeah, what exactly is he saying over here? He's saying because they're steeped in it. Right? That's all they do every waking moment. Yeah. They're totally steeped in it. They have no control. They have no boundaries. Right? Not interested in having boundaries. Right? So now we understand that who we're talking about over here. Talking about a prophet, right? Talking about Ezekiel. So God's putting words in his mouth to give over. right? This is what he's doing. This is what he's doing. So that being said, everyone agrees he's a prophet. Nobody says he isn't a prophet. So we're going to say, well, prophets were negative against non-Jews. I mean, prophets came out very strong against Jews. No question. You read the book of Ezekiel in general, right? Or the book of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, Isaiah does as well. But most of the book of Jeremiah is what is chastising Jewish people. He wants to get them to repent. He says, otherwise, God's going to destroy the base of Mikdash. That God's going to destroy the temple. No, they didn't believe him. They tried to kill him. Very hard to be a prophet, in those days. But in general, he's chastising Jewish people. And you have non-Jews doing terrible things against Jews. Chastise them also. Very good. Right? So what's the point? What's the point the Ramban over here is making? He's saying, for the Medrash, how much they were involved, the Egyptians were involved in immorality. The Canaanites also. But he's singling out here the Egyptians. And he brings proof for the prophet Ezekiel. And he's saying not only how bad it is, but what it's compared to. Right? Now, people say, oh, see, Jews are going to compare, Jews are going to say, a non-Jew seaman is like, it's like an animal, it's like a donkey, it's like a horse, or whatever. Right? Again, either we, explain it in a nice way, whatever. Right? The connotation's bad. Right? No one disagrees. The connotation's bad. But why is the connotation bad? Why is the connotation bad? What's Ezekiel telling you? Ezekiel is telling you they are steeped in immorality. Tremendous amount of immorality. Right? To the extent they don't differentiate between them and animals. No difference. Right? Bestiality is on the books because obviously it happened. Obviously it was common. Common enough for the Torah to say it's forbidden. Today I wouldn't say it's so in vogue. I'm sure people do it. Some people. I didn't take a survey, I didn't look it up. It's probably not, I wouldn't think it's such a high percentage. Right? It's kind of a strange desire, but it doesn't matter. I'm sure people do it. Why would the Torah speak about it otherwise? You tell me, why does the Torah speak about obvious things? Well, there are many things the Torah speaks about. It's not obvious. We never would have thought of, right? In general. Probably 80% of it. Right? But again, this is prophecy. This is prophecy. So now you want to tell me, well, Jewish prophets had it in for non-Jews. A lot of times, non-Jews came against Jewish people, attacked the Jewish people, physically and spiritually. Right? You see what happened in Midian. 24,000 people, 24,000 Jews are killed. Right? Because of immorality. So there are two things God hates more than anything else in the Torah. And the Torah makes very clear. Right? One is idolatry, very, very clear. Right? And the other is immorality. Two things God can't stand. Now you have a whole chapter here. A whole chapter here of immorality. Of who you're not allowed to be with. Now the Torah is telling you, don't go in their ways. Right? And Rashi seems to say, right, we're going to see for the Kuyaka shortly, Rashi seems to say their ways are the worst. Right? The Egyptians, the Ramban here says, steeped in total immorality. Right? And the Canaanites as well. Now, the Kli Yakar is going to ask the following question. Well, we'll get to the Kli Yakar, but he's going to ask the following question. According to Rashi, Rashi says they're worse than everyone else, so don't go in their ways. Now, what would my inference be? What would I say? They're the worst, don't go in their ways. But what about other nations? Other nations not as bad. Does that mean I could go in their ways? That's what he's going to ask. It's one of the questions. One of the questions he's going to ask. And he can't mean that. Rashi for sure can't mean that. Right? He's going to say, don't go in the ways of the Egyptians, these are the worst. And some that are not the worst, you're allowed to go in their ways? It'd be impossible. Right? Rashi's not going to say that. He's going to have to explain what Rashi means. Right? We'll get there. I mean, hopefully we'll get there, start there today, hopefully. But here he's making very clear that what's the forbiddenness here, right? What's so bad what they did, right? So Rashi seems to say what their actions were worse, right? Very good. Their actions were worse, and going in their ways, not just about immorality, but not going to their stadiums, right? Not going to the horse races, not doing anything, right? Because any connection you have to that, in general, going to destroy you. That's what's going to do. It's not going to be good for your soul, right? And that we spoke about. But what's worse, right? You take two things here. What would be worse? Going to the ponies, going to racehorsing, whatever, or immorality. Well, seemingly immorality is worse. Immorality, death penalty. Yeah. So we know that has a much greater negative effect. At the same time, as we spoke last week, and we mentioned this many times, that our surroundings 100% affect us, right? And they can affect us in a negative way. Some more, right? Some less, and some anywhere in between. They affect us. A person says, no, it's not going to affect me. I enjoy it. And what's the problem? So again, maybe you want to tell me it could be a person is only liable, in this case, for wasting time. Because they could have been learning for a guy. For a woman, it wouldn't apply. Right? She doesn't have an obligation to learn like a guy does. Okay. So even if that would be the case, even if 100% that would be the case, you say that's the worst thing. Okay. Is it worse than immorality? No. Is it worse than idolatry? No. Both are death penalty. No, both are death penalty. Going in their ways is not death penalty. But what's the problem going in their ways? All right, we spoke about this last week. I'm not gonna harp on it too much, right? But why is it so bad? It's so bad because it takes you away from Torah. It takes you two steps away or 3 steps away. And then your mind basically turns to mush, and it's hard to learn. Right? Someone I know would say if he's learning with someone, he can tell when they space out, whatever, the person's very, very bright. He can tell if this person spaces out, he knows they probably watched something the night before. It affects him. Affects the person. You lose, attention span. Right? Attention span, used to be how much attention span did a person have? The amount of time the amount of time of a commercial. How long was a commercial on TV back in the day? 6 minutes. That was about the attention span of a person. Today, commercials are much quicker and they just flash images, right? A lot of commercials, they flash, let's say better, flash images at people, right? Just keep flashing images, bam, 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 right? The person was like a fish trying to see like what's going on. That has an effect on a person. Yeah. Dulls the spirit, so to speak, right? A lot of fun, sit and watch, entertaining, right? Person's got their couch potato next to them, so, they shouldn't be bored, right? They got their couch potato next to them. It's got a negative effect. Some of it's more direct, some of it's less direct, but the bottom line is, right, as we mentioned, the bottom line is the messages are bad. All the messages are bad. You have cartoons. Yeah, cartoons are a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of fun to watch. Okay. So even if they're a lot of fun to watch, yeah, there's a lot of negativity. Tremendous amount of negativity and bad things. Yeah, Lashon other things. Right. I mentioned violence. Yeah. It's very easy to dissect the cartoon and show you all the problems. Yeah, and show you, and show a person, watching it, like how that's going to affect it. Now, most people would probably say, you watch too much of it, yeah, it's probably not good. Right? It's probably not good. Yeah, a person will say, watch it once in a while. It's no big deal. Yeah, the values are bad. Right? I don't think there's any question. The values are bad. In most movies, the values are bad. Right? Even if you don't have vulgarity. even if you don't have immorality. Yeah, the values are bad, right? So now you're gonna make a choice. It's enjoyable, that's good, but you're seeing what people are doing with bad values. Even if it's all make believe, doesn't matter. They're giving up bad values. And bad values affect a person for life. Could affect them for life. Yeah, the more you feed into it, yeah, it's only hard to stop. Yeah, hard to stop, right? Can be definitely addictive, right? There's no question, but it has a negative effect. We are affected by what we see. That doesn't apply to Jews. It applies to everybody, right? It applies to Jews, non-Jews, it applies to everybody. It affects them in a negative way. Again, non-Jew doesn't have this great, obligation. Okay, but it affects the soul. Soul doesn't, the soul remembers everything. Soul doesn't forget. Even if it doesn't come out today or yesterday or the day before, it's there. It can come out 5 months later, a week later, 10 months later. It's there. Images that people saw, right? We mentioned, someone put up, someone put up a post, whatever, a while ago. There was a scary movie, the scariest movie I ever saw as a kid, right? So I was just reminded, people saw the movie Jaws. I saw that as a kid. Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah, people will say Nightmare on Elm Street. People will say Poltergeist. People say, whatever, movies with, Chucky's doll, whatever, and his doll, all these things. Yeah, it's all make believe. So, I can't believe he killed so many people and he did this, but he didn't, right? We get caught up in the narrative, right? But it's all make believe. Don't people enjoy making things that are make believe? It's entertaining, right? But it can also grip you emotionally, right? They also, play in a person's emotions. But what does it also do? Right? What's the main thing it does besides entertain? The main thing it does is give up bad values. That's what it does. 100%. Right? Even movies, quote unquote, rated G. Yeah. Even if they're rated G, they're also bad values. Yeah. May not be, graphic, immorality, plenty of innuendos and different things. 100%. Is a kid watching it. I like about adults who know how to filter these things. You're affected by it. Everybody's affected by it. How can you not be? Yeah. So now, even for non-Jews would be bad, right? That's what we said. They don't have the same obligation. Okay. Please tell me, even for a Jew, if you didn't have vulgarity, immorality, what's the worst prohibition? You wasted time. You could have been learning. Yeah. But more than that, the negativity that a person sees, right? It's the message that they're giving over. It's a message, right? And they have, pretty subtle messages, that they want to give over. So here comes on the Ramban. The Ramban is telling you how bad what the Egyptians do, which is very true, right? In terms of immorality. And he says, I got this. I got proof. I got proof it's true. Right? Because I got verses that testify to it. Where are the verses? Now you might tell me, why aren't the verses in the Torah? Good question. Well, where are the verses? In Ezekiel. And these verses are very graphic. Right? That's why I'm trying to keep it PG-13 here. It's very graphic. Right? It's basically showing how their lust is out of control. Way out of control. That's how bad it is. But he's a prophet. No one's going to argue with a prophet. Anyone ever come out? I mean, certainly not an expert in Islam and Christianity by any stretch. Anyone ever come out and say the prophets are, they don't know what they're doing and, they're anti-women and they're anti-other things? They're prophets. Nobody disagrees. Anyone disagree Isaiah's a prophet? No. Because I know of. Anyone disagree Ezekiel's a prophet? Yeah. Or Jeremiah's a prophet. I don't disagree. So this is the word of God. They are saying over the word of God. They're not false prophets. Yeah, they are, I would say, they are the real deal. So if they are the real deal, and they're telling you by no uncertain terms how disgusting these people are, absolutely disgusting these people are, he's basically telling you they're worse than animals. Animals act on instinct, right? They act on instinct. They're programmed DNA. They can choose to eat, not to eat. They don't have free will. We have free will. Mankind has free will. But you ask the question again, try and keep this clean. How much lust can a person really have? I mean, as the Gemara says, wears out a person also. Yeah, totally wears them out. That stop people? Maybe not. Maybe not. They gotta, replenish whatever and go back to doing what they were doing. Okay. But as it skyrocketed, gone out of control, different ways, yeah. People gonna say, why should I have limitations? Why should I have limitations? Why can't I enjoy? Why can't I tap in? No one said you can't. It's done the right way. But at the same time, there are limitations. Right? So we say in no uncertain terms, these people are so bad. These people are so immoral. Yeah? They're worse than animals. Totally worse than animals. Yeah? They compare to animals. The prophet talking. Right? Now this gets quoted, say, oh, look what the Jewish people think. Look how they compare, relations and whatever, of non-Jews or whatever. First of all, he's not saying all non-Jews. Yeah, he said they're worse than other people. These people are worse. The Egyptians are worse. The Canaanites are worse. Okay. Now, if the Torah would say, and then this would have to be explained, why would it say, let's say it would say, all non-Jews. All non-Jews have this. And they're worse than everybody else. Why? Person can argue, God gave them, too much of a dose of lust. They're going to say, what do you want from me? Right? It's all over the media, it's all over the news, it's all in the movies. That's what people do. Do it more, do it less, whatever. But that's what they do. So what do you want from me? You gave me too high potion. Okay. Does that mean that whatever we have, whatever's inside of us, we have to control, or we have to work to try and control it? But he gave me too big of a dose. Yeah, someone will say, I got too big of a dose, of anger. I got too big of a dose of being a miser. I got too big of a dose of, I don't know, not showing gratitude. I got too much of it. Yeah, we all have too much doses of certain things. Right? We're all made up of parents' DNA, for better or for worse. Right? So we have certain DNA. Not like God says, act on it. This is what I want you to do. But why to give you certain DNA? To overcome certain things. Some people have more of this, less of that. Other people have more of this and less of that. Okay. So everyone has what they're supposed to have and what they're supposed to work on. Right? But if you tell me, whole group of people, got 10, 50,000 extra doses, yeah, it's kind of hard to fight against. Right? It's part of your nature. But who says the person has to be disciplined? Yeah, if it's done in a way where it's meaningless, it's meaningless. Oh, you still get benefit, right? Both will get benefit, right? Again, we'll keep this clean. Both will get benefit, very good. But it can be meaningless. You know what some people think? So what? Two consenting adults, doesn't matter. Even if it's meaningless. Even if it's never going to lead to anything. Right? Each one using the other. Okay? Is that good? Certainly not good. Not good on both ends. Yeah. Will some people do it? Some people will. Will a lot of people do it? Probably. Probably. Yeah. Then some might feel guilty. Why did I do it? And, it wasn't going to mean anything anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's what the inclination is. So you'll say, but you have such extra doses of it, it's unfair. Okay, it's unfair. But who says all the time you should act on it? The problem is what the Ramban here is saying, is that culture is steeped in it. They're steeped in it. Yeah? So the Jewish people live in that place. We're going to go to that place. So the Torah tells you, don't go in their ways. It's kind of hard over here. Because look how much they're steeped in it. How can they not be affected? Why would God send a person there? Why would he send his nation there? No chance of survival, right? The desire is too strong. And what? He's going to wipe them out because he hates, hates immorality? Could. He's going to say, I didn't tell you to do this. I didn't want you to do this. But you put your nation in danger, seemingly in danger, right? What's the danger? Total immorality. Look what happened, right? Look what happened, with Bilam. He couldn't curse the Jewish people. God doesn't allow him to curse the Jewish people. So how does he finally get the Jewish people to sin? Yeah. Takes all these women, convinces them to do idolatry and be immoral. 24,000 people die. Not a small number. 24,000 people die because of immorality. So you can't get them one way, you get them another way. Yeah, it's a tremendous danger. Not only that, so we'll address this question for a second. God sent the Jewish people into Egypt. Yeah. How long were the Jewish people in Egypt for? Supposed to be for 400 years. When did they come out? 210 years. Why did God take them out early? Because if He had not taken them out early, they would have been destroyed spiritually. They would have hit the 49th level of impurity, would have been destroyed spiritually. So if God knew that, and He knew that only 20%, as Rashi says, 20% come out of Egypt, and the 80% die by the end of the plague of darkness. So you're talking about 8 or 9 million people, let's say, or 7 or 8 million people, let's say, that died. Because we know that there were 600,000 men between the age of 20 and 60, not including women and children, came out of Egypt. So you're talking about 2 to 3 million people. So if only 20%, came out, that means 8 million people died. 8 million people did not come out of Egypt. And those are not good statistics. So God put them obviously there for a reason. Yeah. And we're going to see, or I saw earlier that why so many people die in Egypt? Why essentially they die? Because they didn't want to go to the land of Israel. They didn't want to leave Egypt. Right? We're going to see that. It's mind-boggling. They're being demolished, physically and spiritually. The only thing that saved them, they didn't change their clothes, they didn't change their names, and they kept Rosh Chodesh. Right? They kept the new month. Right, I think this kept circumcision also. Yeah, whatever it was. Whatever it was. But that led them to have merit in order to be redeemed. Okay. But 80% don't want to come out. They have no desire to come out. So you're going to say the cream of the crop of Jewish people came out and they witnessed the miracles. Okay. But doesn't God know past, present, future? God knows past, present, future. If God knows past, present, future, why would He put them in such a situation knowing they were going to fail? Why'd they have to go there in the first place? You're putting them in danger. You're putting them in spiritual danger. Not to mention physical danger. So you say, God can stop the physical danger. Okay. God can make sure they don't get killed. Not everybody gets killed. Yeah. And there'll only be a remnant left. Okay. What about spiritually? People are not robots. People have feelings. People have emotions. And we are drawn after society we live in. For better or for worse. For better or for worse. Everybody, I'm sure, has good things and bad things to say about society they live in. Some will say, there are more bad things than good things, just we can't leave. Yeah. Others will say it's a mixture, and they're not going to leave. Others will say, we're getting out of here, we're going to leave. And some will leave, because they don't like what's going on around them. I tell me maybe it's not so bad. They get a better job somewhere else, could live a higher lifestyle somewhere else. Could that draw someone to leave? Sure. 100%. Right? Grass is always greener. Very good. But if God knows past, present, and future, you're putting them in a place, you're putting the Jewish people and the potential Jewish people in a place where not only are they going to fail, to a certain extent, but the majority of them are not going to come out. Right? Now, you could answer, well, God only wants the cream of the crop. So he's talking about quality, not quantity. But isn't it painful for God even one Jewish person dies? Or they weren't exactly Jewish yet until they got to Mount Sinai. Doesn't that pain him? Sure. God wanted to destroy and kill 24,000 people that went astray. Didn't want to do it. But sometimes punishment. Get on up for your actions, and sometimes the actions are very severe. Right? And the repercussions are very severe. People want to hear that. People just want to do what they want to do. They don't, leave me alone. But over here, we have to do what God says. Now, the question could be, maybe they were going to fail anyway. So God put them in a situation where it's only a question how much they're going to fall. But they for sure are going to fall. Yeah. Now, some people would say that's the case. And that happens to people. In other words, person's in a certain situation. There's no way they're going to pass it. The only question is how far they fall. But Ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, believers, the son of believers believe. God would never put a person in that type of situation. In other words, He's not setting us up to fail. If obviously we're in a certain situation, it must be we're in that situation for a reason. Even if we think it's impossible, even if we think there's no possible way out. Yeah. Even if that is the case, what does God think? God probably thinks the opposite. Right? He probably thinks the opposite. Yeah, we may think we can't do it, but God gave everyone the power to overcome whatever they're going through. Yeah, some people have it easier, some people not. You can ask what happens. This question comes up more frequently than not, and that is someone goes through a trauma, the person gets destroyed. Okay, God don't have to judge it how He judges it, and what they could have done or not done. It's not for us to judge. Yeah, someone went through the Holocaust, lost their whole family, right? They survived. Yeah, they survived, but they saw atrocities that they wouldn't even open their mouth and speak about. Yeah. If they didn't keep Torah and mitzvahs, if they grew up with Torah and mitzvahs and they didn't keep it, God's really going to demolish them, right? To a certain extent, right? To a certain extent. However He's going to judge it, He's going to judge it. Yeah. Now, obviously, a person goes through either things, they have to be punished for because they did it themselves, or something their soul has to go through, right? For whatever reason. What is the person potentially in control of? What are they potentially, I say potentially, right, in quotation marks, what are they potentially in control of? Potentially they're in control how they react. Now, if a person gets demolished and squashed, yeah, they're probably going to need, serious therapy. Yeah, a lack of self-esteem. Yeah, totally demolished, made fun of, maybe for many years, who knows? And it never, it leads to other problems. Right? It leads to other problems. Now, based on that, how is God going to view it? Well, we don't know. Right? God has spoken to me, recently, or pretty much ever, right? For that matter, we're not prophets, not son of prophets. Right? Now, God can look at it in a number of different ways. Right? He can say, you're right. So I put you through the ringer, and this is what your soul has to go through. But he could say either because of the trauma and a person gets demolished, probably exempt from most things. Yeah, probably not going to get punished for most things because they're damaged. Right? They're tremendously damaged. On the other hand, because there's always another hand, right? The other hand is God can say, you're right. Person went through trauma. They went through hardship. But God can say that this person, this soul has such intestinal fortitude. Even what they went through, they're still going to be able to overcome it. they're still going to be able to come close or reach their potential. Yeah. Again, God sees the source of the soul, what it's capable of, what it's not capable of. God cannot punish somebody who's not capable of something. That wouldn't be fair, right? And we get into the cycle where, let's say, we expect something from somebody else, right? Let's call it, in the vernacular, common decency. We'll call it common decency. Now, if you deal with someone, let's say, who's narcissist, who thinks all about themselves, they don't have common decency in many things because they don't care. What do they care about? What relates to them? You tell them something, they'll say, "Oh, very interesting, whatever," change the subject, it's all about them. That's what they are, right? Now, dealing with somebody like that, is that going to be easy? No. 100% it's not going to be easy. Yeah. Would the person rather not have such a relationship with such a person? Sure. They might have a choice. Yeah, well, take the parent. Yeah, kind of have a choice over here, right? I mean, you could distance yourself, whatever. But think about it. Think about it. This person will never see your side of anything in general. Why? Because they can't. Why can't they? Because they got something wrong with their brain. Something wrong with their brain is they are God's gift to the world and no one else matters. So you tell me, oh, the mission's in Edrin. Very good. The world's created for me, and not for you. So what does that mean? What does it mean for me, the world was created? Right? Each person's their own world, but they don't see anything outside themselves. Now, somebody like that, regardless of what they do, right? Look at it from their perspective, which nobody wants to hear, right? Sometimes people say, listen, look what the person did and this and that, but think about where they're coming from. Thinking about what they went through. Most people say, I don't care. They don't care what they went through. They're causing me pain. They're causing me aggravation. But okay, let's step in their shoes for 1 second. They have brain damage. They have a serious mental health issue. Now, a person like this, in general, unless they go for therapy, and actually therapy does something, yeah, this person is thinking all about themselves all the time. So now, if someone comes along and says, listen, I'm speaking to you, this is what I'm going through, and they change the subject, and they seem not to care, yeah, that's bad. 100% that's bad. But at the same time, if a person understands it's a mental health issue, and they understand the person's a whack job in general, yeah, it's not the person's fault. Why is it not the person's fault? Because people like this, in general, I'm not saying they can't change, people like this will not change. They're not capable of change. If they're not capable of change, I mean, let's just follow the logic. If they're not capable of change, and we understand that because there's something wrong with their brain in general, and they won't go for help. So I know, and everyone else knows that they're not capable of change. If they're not capable of change, you cannot expect them to change. Again, it's going to be hard if they say all kinds of terrible things and nasty things. Okay. But A, they're never going to change, let's say. But B, even more importantly, they won't be able to change. They're not capable of change. Now, if they're not capable of change, and you know that, and even subconsciously, maybe they know that, okay, they're not capable of change. So they're going to say, this is the way it is, you got to deal with it. Good? Now, why do I say good? Because that's the reality. The reality is it has to come from you, not from them. Because from them, you're never going to get it. For them, they're not going to give you time of day. And again, it's not necessarily a personal thing. It might be. It doesn't have to be a personal thing, right? Because the reason is because the brain doesn't function the way it should. So they look down upon anybody, not just you, but everybody else as well. Right? They don't fit into the world outlook or whatever. Yeah. So what happens? A person can be crushed by it. Could be. But a person, again, in general, and this is a hard thing. Most people probably won't want to hear this, right? Well, it's a hard thing that we want people to change for the better. Obviously, they want us to change as well. Very good. But the question is, if a person is not capable of change, in general, someone who's narcissist, let's say, if they don't go for help, they are not capable of change. It's not just they're not capable of change. They don't even see what they did is wrong. They don't see they did anything wrong. They're going to say it's your fault. They'll blame you. You're sensitive to this, to that. They'll blame you. Very good. So can we expect, or should we expect, that they're going to change? Right? Growing up, I heard this, I hear it every so often. That's the way it is. That's the way it is. Not going to change. So if a person is not capable, again, make it very simple. Person is not capable of change. Should we have expectations, right? The statement is that, don't expect anything, whatever you get is a bonus. That's the statement. Why would a person say that? In order to protect themselves from getting hurt. They put up barriers in front of them so they don't get hurt emotionally. Yeah, so they don't expect anything, so you knock it off, you blow it off. Yeah, but if you have expectations, which probably a lot of us do, at least minimal expectations. In person, you expected to come through and they didn't for whatever reason. Now you're mad. Now you're angry. Why didn't they help? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do the other thing? So if you don't expect anything, you don't lose anything. Or you do have expectations at some level. But again, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that we have to see that there are people out there, certainly not everybody. Yeah, I'm not going to throw everybody under the bus. But there are people out there, yeah, they're not going to change, but they don't see what they do is wrong. They don't see what they do is wrong. Now, if that's the case, and a person like that is not capable of change, yeah, in general, someone's narcissist is not capable of change unless they go through major therapy. Yeah. So now you got to deal with somebody like that. Okay. But if you understand deep down, you understand they 100% are not capable of change. So if they say something or do something, understand from their perspective, which nobody wants to do, but from their perspective, yeah, they are not going to change. They're not going to give you the time of day. They'll let you say one thing and then they'll just blast you or just go on with life. Because they only care about themselves. It's a disease. Yeah, it's a mental health issue. Serious mental health issue. Anyone that's come, in contact with narcissistic people, they know. Right? They know they're hard to deal with. But if they're not capable of change, a person cannot expect them to change. They're just expecting something that'll never happen. And what does that do? Gets the person angry. Gets the person aggravated. They want the person to realize their mistake and change. Okay. I'm not going to say that, if it was reversed and, people want us to change certain things. Are we going to change? You tell me it depends what it is. Or it depends how bad it is. It depends how destructive it is. Maybe a person gets out of bad habits. They don't see what they do. Yeah. But again, if someone's open enough that they're going, this is very good for Elul before Rosh Hashanah. If they're open enough and they understand, they might have to work hard to change. They might have to go for therapy to change or to see things in a different way. What do you do if someone is not capable of that? So it's unrealistic to expect them to change. They're not capable. If they're not capable of change, and I understand where they're coming from, again, not so easy, but if I understand where they're coming from, then whatever they say, what do I care? So a person will say, yeah, they make fun, they put me down, and they always did that. Okay. They had a screw loose. They had a serious screw loose. If someone has a serious screw loose, I'm not wasting time. I'm not wasting time. Why am I, letting them in my head? There's no point. They're never going to change. They're never going to apologize. They're not capable. If they're not capable, I have nothing to be upset about. Because the person is mentally challenged. And if they're mentally challenged, they can't change that. Can't fix that. Someone who was born, let's say Down syndrome. Yeah, let's say Down syndrome. There are people higher functioning. There are people lower functioning. Yeah. Even the ones that are, let's say, very high functioning. Let's say extremely high functioning. Would we ever call somebody like that normal, quote unquote? No. Why are we going to call them normal? Because they're not. There's something off about them. Someone who's on the autistic spectrum, let's say. They come across certain ways, very good, right? A person will know what to look for, in certain things, if they know what to look for. But there's something off. There's something off. Social issues, other issues. So you can say about anybody, well, we have our own quirks. True. Everybody does. You can say we're all not normal in some level. Okay. But I'm talking about, things that have been diagnosed. Someone, let's say, has Asperger's. He's very bright, extremely bright. Yeah, something's off. Usually it's with social things, usually. Could be other things also. Yeah. You take somebody like Elon Musk. Yeah. Yeah, had a lot of success. There's something off with this guy. Yeah. Something off. Not 100% there. In different ways. Brilliant in other ways, no question. Say whatever you want about him, but there's no question. But yeah, there's something there. There is something there. So if somebody's not all there, in general, then how can you have expectations? That goes against the grain. You can't have any expectations. Because again, say it, 10 times, they're not capable. It's impossible unless they go for help. And if they don't go to help, they don't go for help. I can't expect anything from them. You can't expect someone to change if they don't have the capability to change. Now, sometimes we do that, which is wrong. It's kind of foolish. But, why would people do it? Because they want acceptance. They want people to hear them. They want to be patted on the back, so to speak. They want to be built up. They want to think they're on top of the world and people back them, i.e. family. It doesn't always work that way. A lot of times it doesn't work that way. One of the greatest pieces of advice, I was ever given is this is how you have to look at people. Some people, they'll never pat you on the back. Never. You're on this path, you're by yourself. You get ostracized, might get made fun of. Maybe they won't speak to you. Maybe it's probably not such a bad idea, right? In many ways. But you won't get acceptance. And what do we want? What do people want in general, almost more than anything else? They want to be accepted. They want to be, and who do they want to be accepted by? Who do they really want to be accepted by more than anyone else? Family. That's who they want to be accepted by. Yeah, and it makes sense. Right? Totally makes sense. Okay. But is that realistic? Right? And some people say, yeah, I never had that family love for anything. Could be, because they couldn't express themselves. Now, again, does that have a negative effect on the person? Could that, stop them, from being quote unquote, normal in relationships? Could that be a hindrance to them? Sure. Person has, has to realize what it is, and people say, "Oh, I'll never do what my parents did," and a lot of times we repeat what they did, just by osmosis. We don't work on things, even if we say they're bad. Sometimes, they just affect us. You see it enough, it affects you. Now, all that being said, it's very good in theory. I think this is great in theory. Not just because I said it, but I think it's very good in theory. Yeah, the problem is you got to put it into action. When you put it into action, it's very hard, right? Why is it very hard? Very simple. A person said something, did something, maybe they did it many times, multiple times. So a person will say, but the damage is done. They've already done the damage. Okay. So a person's a broken soul in some ways. In some ways. And justifiably by what happened to them. Okay. What if they decide, they don't want to feel this way anymore? They don't like being like this anymore. They want to change, get out of this, this cycle, this negative cycle. Now, if it's happened over time, and a person just got beaten down, it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to do that. But if a person may need serious therapy for them. I'm not saying not. Yeah, I'm not saying the Torah is going to will it. I wish the Torah would will a lot of different things, but it doesn't. Because we're complex human beings. So we need help in other ways as well. But if I would think in theory, intellectually, if a person understood this is what the situation is, and this is what the person is, and the reality is no matter what you did, you didn't deserve the reaction you got because the person is sick. They're sick mentally. Yeah, like seriously sick mentally. Now, if you understand that intellectually, and what a person did really wasn't so bad, and the reaction didn't warrant it, and it spiraled, if I understand, and I talk it out, and I understand these people were whack jobs, some of them, that's already part of the healing process. Not 100%, probably not even 70%, which it would be. It depends how internally strong a person is. If it would be to the point where a person just said over and over again, I didn't do anything wrong. This person, is mentally ill, right? And even if they would go back, right? Even if they would go back in time, and a parent, a sibling, whatever, said something, and now you see it from their perspective. So you tell me what they did was still bad, and you still feel the repercussions. Okay. Right? That very well could be. These are deep-rooted things. But if I understand, at least on the superficial level, if I understand what happened and what transpired, and even if a person did something wrong, they're not the bad guy. The bad guy was someone who totally exploded and, never gave the person time of day. They're the bad guy. Yeah. Right? So even if a person, whatever they did, I'm saying like they lit the house on fire or did other things, whatever they did, and the reaction was totally irrelevant to what they did. Intellectually, potentially they can understand what they did. Okay. Kids are kids, right? They do things. There could be long-ranging repercussions. Could be. Yeah. But if they see this parent was off the wheels, let's say off the rails, and this happens many times, right? People only realize like when they're teenagers. They only realize like when they're teenagers, like there's something off here. Because they see, they see their other friends, they see their parents, they see how they interact. Yeah, I don't know everything goes on behind closed doors. Okay. Well, they see like this, a relationship. It's not the same. Yeah, it's totally not the same. So if you don't have role models to a proper relationship, most likely you're going to have problems with relationships down the road. Because you don't know what a healthy relationship is. And it's not a person's fault. That's how they grow up. right? So they have to relearn everything. Yeah, because what they got was nothing or negative. Yeah, so one thing, part of it, right, is to understand no matter what the person did, even if they did it as a kid, doesn't mean they're bad. Third doesn't mean they're bad. Yeah, and maybe the punishment didn't fit the crime. Maybe. Yeah. And maybe a lot of times it was like that, and the person was walking on eggshells. Right? A bunch of stories I read. You know, the parent was a wacko, had mental health issues. But they needed help to deal with the fact that they thought it was always on them. Right? And anyone, God forbid, who's been in an abusive relationship, they all know. They all know after the fact, and after a significant amount of time has gone by, they try and perfect themselves, they try and do this, try and do that, try and do that thing. And in the end, nothing works. And they're blamed. Right? And it's all their fault. Yeah, they don't realize they're in an abusive relationship. Right? Until they realize. Then that changes everything. Why does it change everything? Again, I'm not saying should stay in that relationship, but they understand it's not their fault. When a person thinks it's their fault, what are they going to do? They say, okay, I must be responsible. So I have to do everything in my power to fix it. So they try this, doesn't work. Try that, doesn't work. Try other things, doesn't work. So they bend over backwards trying to perfect themselves in such a way that this cycle won't happen. But it does. Right? So then, they realize there's not much more, they can do. And they're, let's say they're burnt out of it. They want to keep working on themselves because nothing works. Finally they may see that this pattern here, negative pattern. And through this negative pattern, they're going to come to realize and, probably need help going through it. They're going to realize it wasn't their fault. Maybe some things were. Okay. Nobody's perfect. So maybe some things, they egged on, they didn't do right, whatever. Okay. But 60% of the other stuff has nothing to do with them. And because it had nothing to do with them, they bent over backwards trying to fix it, but it wasn't their problem. Right? And they're realizing and bending over backwards trying to say they are the problem. So it must be my problem. So I can try and fix it. Very good. Right? To the best of your ability, you're going to try and fix. Try this, try that, try that thing. And it all doesn't work. Then what happens? The person breaks. Person breaks at some point. They say, I tried this, I tried that, I tried the other thing, and and what ends up happening? Then hopefully they get the help that they need. Right? Hopefully they get the help they need. But this is what happens. This is potentially what happens in abusive relationships. Yeah, a person can only see it until they've exhausted everything else. And once they've exhausted everything else, then they realize, you know what? I can't do any more. I've tried this. And they start to see, or somebody shows them, or people show them, you've done what you could do. But it's not all on you. Once the person thinks it's all on them, they'll bend over backwards, try and fix it because they're the problem. They're the trigger. They're this. And they might be. They might be in certain things. What gives the right the other person to do whatever they want? And they say, yeah, it's your issue, and you do this, and you do that, as if to say they're God's gift to the world. And that they're perfect. It's not my problem. It's your problem. You have the issue. So that's very convenient. Extremely convenient. Because that means I have no responsibility. I can keep doing what I'm doing. It's your fault. You're the one who's got the problems. Now, what do you do in such a situation where that person, they don't think they have any problems? They don't think they have any. This is, being narcissist, plus. They don't think they have any issues, no problems. It's not your problem. And they're not going to change. Now there's tremendous amount of friction. There are triggers. Many, many triggers. How can a person live with such a person? So, person will say, okay, they have these issues. Okay, I have my own issues. Good. So you got to work on your own issues. Good. Does working on your own issues, in this case, is that going to solve the problem? And the answer is it depends. Right? It's always a good answer. Why does it depend? It depends on how much the person's willing to take and how much they're willing to do. And if they, they put in effort for a long time, however you define a long time, they put in effort, they're working on themselves, doesn't mean they're perfect. Doesn't mean they don't have to work on. But if there's nobody home on the other side, then a person's going to make a choice. And that choice is going to be either, I'll deal with it however I deal with it, and I'm going to stay in this relationship or not. Let's say a person has little kids, and getting divorced not such a great option, whatever, but person's mental, health and their stability is crucial, right? So even if, the kids will suffer, no question, depending how much, yeah, but it'd be worse to be together. There is a mitzvah to get divorced. If you have to get divorced, get divorced. It's on the books, even though the end of the Gemara says God sheds tears if anyone gets divorced. Even the person is matched up with the person supposed to be married to. Very good. Can they mess it up? They can mess it up. 100%. I'm talking about when you marry the wrong person. You marry the right person. Yeah. But it's kind of like a flower. You don't give it light, you don't give it water, it dies. Yeah, it'll die. The person married 20 years, 30 years, whatever. Right? It's something you still have to work at. Right? You have to work at it. It takes effort. It takes a tremendous amount of effort. But at some point, person hopefully comes to the conclusion and they say, I've done everything I can. The onus is on the other person. And if they see that's really not their issue, per se, they have certain issues, okay. But the other person refused to work on theirs. Or, in order for them to change, some people are so complex, so very complex, if they had to dig themselves up, or let's say better, dig themselves out, it may destroy them in the process. Right? Sometimes that's what has to be done. Right? A person goes to therapists, if they're good, they'll break them down and make them realize, hopefully, without destroying them. But in order to fix them, in order to help them, sometimes a person has to be broken down in order to be brought up. But sometimes what's that going to do? What will that do? It'll kill them. Right? We say any little change is hard to do. Okay. If a person has massive change to make, now it can be tremendously beneficial. For them, for the spouse, for the kids, tremendously beneficial. Hugely beneficial. To put in the work and the effort it's going to be hard. And we get in a lot of bad habits. We do things, by nature, in general. So we've been doing things for years and years. And what triggers and this and that to fix it, it's going to take a lot of work. And for some people, they're just going to say, it's going to be too painful to do. It might be. Not going to say not. But the question is, okay, person's going to ask themselves, is it worth it to fix? You're going to have to go through pain to do it. And the other person says, I'm here. I'm willing to go through. I'm willing to help. The other person might be destroyed in the process by doing it. So you say, well, you can start somewhere. Yeah, so I know the story, none of the details, or too many details, but basically, somebody's married for many years, have a lot of kids, and one of the spouses says, like, this certain thing bothers me, really bothers me, and I want you to change. You got to do something to change, right? And they gave the person an ultimatum, and they basically said, listen, I'll help you, I'll work with you, whatever, but it has to change. And if it doesn't change, I'm done. Like, I can't take it anymore. Like, it's just, I can't take it anymore. So what happened? The person says, no, this is who I am. I'm not going to speak to anyone, this, that. I get divorced. They end up getting divorced. Now, could be there were more things than that to it, but that was I think the biggest part of it. Now, a person will say, well, isn't that tragic? It's tragic. This could have been the person they were meant to be with. Okay. That was their what we call their Bashir. It was the one that they were supposed to be with, and whatever. What can you do? The person want to change. You'll say, for some people, it's too hard to change. Yeah, it's too painful to change. Okay, so in the bigger scheme of things, even if that's true, even if it's going to be very hard for them, in the bigger scheme of things, the person has to ask themselves, is it worth it? What are the benefits? What are the pros? What are the cons? Not just, oh, what am I going to get out of it here? What are the pros and cons if I don't do this? Yeah. The person decided it wasn't worth it for them. Married 30 years, wasn't worth it. Okay. I'm not here to judge. I'm just telling over. So a person can be that stubborn, which I could understand. We are stubborn people in general. Yeah, for good and for bad. But a person can be stubborn and say, I'm not changing. Even if it's to everybody's benefit. I'm the way I am. I'm not going to change. Or they would say, I would want to change, maybe in theory. But you know what? It takes so much work to do. I don't know if I'd survive it. Now, that's being honest. That's definitely being honest. And it could destroy them. It could be very, very hard. Okay. The person has to ask themselves, in whatever situation, is this good or is it not good? Is it going to help me or not help me? And what are my end goals? There's a lot of questions that have to be asked here. And, I'm certainly not a psychologist by trade and play one on I didn't play one on TV either. But, a person has to know themselves. They have to be able to see the repercussions of their actions. And some people can't see it. There are people out there that will not, if you tell them something, they won't hear it. It doesn't affect them. It's your issue, not my issue. You got a problem with it? Okay, that's the way it is. Right, people will say, this is the way I am, I'm not going to change. Deal with it. I mean, it's kind of bad if you think about it. Because I want you to do anything. They're not willing to do anything to change. So now, what's the other person saying? Now you got to make a decision. You want to have that type of relationship or not? Is it worth it to you to keep up such a relationship or not? Because you know, and they know, and you know, and they know, they're not going to change. They're not interested in change. So if they're not interested in change for the better, or they don't think they have to change, then it's your choice. Right? It's your choice. Now, even if someone would say, even if they would say, you're right, this whole thing, 100% you're right. Okay. That's a good start. So they admit they're at fault. Good. That's, again, very good for El. Very good right before Rosh Hashanah. That's beautiful. Now they're going to do anything to change. The ball's in their court. Yeah, and let's say they lay a goose egg. They don't do anything. They stay the same. So nothing changed. The only thing that changed is they admitted something. Okay. That's good. So we're not going to say it's not good. That's good. They admitted they have an issue. Or they admitted what the issue is. Good. And they're responsible. Better? Yeah. Huge. It's a huge thing. Well, then you get a goose egg. Nothing changes. So what they said doesn't matter. Totally doesn't matter. It's a big thing. I would agree. They want to change. Sorry. They admit that it's their fault. Majority of this thing, whatever it is, it's their fault. Good. That's huge. That is huge. What if it doesn't manifest into anything? They were just words. They meant it. I'm not saying they didn't mean it. They meant it. What happens? They don't do anything. Now, what does the other person do? They're going to push them on it? If they listen, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, you said this, so what's going to be? What are you willing to do? And the person says, again, I don't disagree. I don't disagree. This is the problem. This is the problem. Great. What are you going to do to fix it? Are you going to do anything to fix it? And if by osmosis they do nothing, what does that mean? They're not interested. I still think it's a good thing they admitted what they did. Okay. But the problem is, it didn't manifest itself. It didn't go anywhere. Didn't help anybody. So now what does the other person do? Nothing to do. They're not going to make the effort. They're not interested. So you got to move on. At whatever level. And that can be painful. Because now you just made a huge breakthrough. Right? Now you want to ride the wave of this huge breakthrough. Great. Great. And if it goes nowhere, there's nothing to do. And, a person can't do anything. A person wants to have a relationship with someone, they're not interested. So what can you do? If you say, no, anyone over here, people will say, you got to be the bigger person. Why do I have to be the bigger person? They're not interested. Yeah. For any number of reasons, which aren't valid. They're not interested. Right? That's the bottom line. They're not interested. Okay. Well, you have to make them interested. Why do I have to make them interested? You can bring a horse to the trough to drink. If the horse don't want to drink, it doesn't want to drink. You got to sit there and force that, sit on the horse's head and make it drink? I don't think so. You'd probably get thrown, kicked, stomped on, who knows what. Not going to happen. Right? And it's unrealistic for a person to say that. Yeah. Now, for the greater good, in some cases, would a person say, you know what, you're right. Person's not going to change, doesn't matter. I'll be the bigger person. Because there's a greater good. Let's say for the sake of, family harmony, other things. So the greater good is worth it. If you think it's worth it. If you don't think the greater good is worth it, then there's nothing to do. Now, someone might say, but that's a lack in the person. But if someone doesn't want to have that relationship, let's say, they're not interested in that relationship, and you beg and you plead and this and that, right? You could be the bigger person. Do you want to be the bigger person? I don't know. I bet all the money I don't have, most people probably not. I sit there and get sledgehammered. For what? Nothing you can do is going to interest them. It's not going to interest them. So it's a waste of time. But I understand a person wants acceptance. They want to have this relationship. It's an important relationship, let's say. Okay. But what do you do if the other person doesn't want? Seemingly has nothing to do. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. So then someone's going to say, okay, for the sake of peace, you have to be the bigger person. What would most people say? What would most people say? Say, I'm not going to be the bigger person. It's not about being petty. It's not about not wanting to do the right thing. Maybe deep down they think, you know what? Really, I should be the bigger person. I should really be the bigger person. But if that person doesn't give one iota what you do and how you do and this and that, they'll never pick up the phone and this and that. Do you really want to be the bigger person? Yeah. Right. Now, some people would say, even so. They'll say alpha PK, and even so, it's still worth it. Okay. Yeah. To me, that person is a giant. They're a giant. Because most people would never do it. Yeah. You might tell me it's because of ego or ego, as we would say here. Yeah. Person like what? I have to bow down to you. They bow down to you, but you won't give me the time of day. Someone told me a story. They were somewhere, and sibling comes in. They don't have such a great relationship with the sibling. They don't talk very much. Whatever. Someone says, "Oh, your sibling's coming. Like he's coming." Yeah, I walked in the door. He's coming. So a friend of mine says, then what should I do? I should bow. I said, great, hear ye, this is great, king has walked in the door, get on the ground, start to bow. What are you supposed to say? The person, that's what someone tells them. Look who walked in the door. Okay. Imagine if the situation was reversed. They're going to give you time of day. So what if you walked in the door? So what if you hadn't seen them in a long time? That's what a person's going to say. If the other person walked in, oh, God walked in. Who walked in? Someone told me the story. Made to feel like they absolutely had to honor this person. Oh, like they're very, very, they don't have so much contact. I'm not going to say no contact, whatever, little contact. Like God walked in the door. That's what the person wanted to say. The other person doesn't give the time of day. So what do? Okay, be friendly, this, that. More than that. Can you expect something? Can we have expectations on such a person? No. You'd be a fool to want expectations like that. But we do. We want to be accepted. Even if not going to accept our way of life or whatever, it's civil, whatever. But if a person can't have certain expectations, why, or like they're not realistic, why in the world they have to be the bigger person? What does being the bigger person do over here? Yeah, someone will say family harmony. Oh, that's a big one. Right? It'll keep the family together. Yeah, it'll keep the family together. Now, keeping the family together is not a small thing. Right? Keeping the family together is not a small thing. On the other hand, how far does it go? If you put, there are people that think, I think wrongly, it's a big thing for family to get together. Siblings, cousins, distant cousins, whatever. Every once in a while we get together. So what would some people think? You put everybody into a room, right? You're eating, schmoozing, this, that. That means everyone loves each other. Because you put them in one room. There are people who believe such a thing, naively, but they want to believe that everyone's there because they want to be there. You're right, they couldn't. They had a choice. They didn't have to be there. Good. They didn't have an obligation to be there. But they felt it's important enough to be there. Okay. That means when everybody leaves, 2 weeks later, a month later, they're going to be in contact and get together? Probably not. Are they going to speak to each other? I don't know. Some more, some less, whatever it is. But people have this mistaken idea. Some people have this mistaken idea, get everyone together, and it's like, kumbaya, everyone's going to be playing the guitar and singing. Because you put them in the same room. So I'd say on the one hand, we should never have expectations. And that statement somewhat is true. Expect nothing. Whatever you get is a bonus. Relations are complex. They're very complex. Some people, a person may have said something, or maybe have done something. Could be more egregious, less egregious. They just never forgive them. Over the years, they never forgive them. So the families never get together. Each one to their own, but they can have, tremendous hakpad one on another because of what they said or what they did. So, they never get together, they never see each other, and families never see each other. Now, again, that might not be a bad thing, and in some ways, but people say it's terrible. What does the Torah have to say? Doesn't the Torah say you can't bear a grudge? Right? Can't bear a grudge against someone else, against your fellow Jew. Against non-Jews, you could probably bear a grudge, right? Doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say it's a good thing, right? It's forbidden. Forbidden to bear a grudge. Yeah, but the person did this and did that and did the other thing. Okay. Still can't bear a grudge against a Jew. Against a non-Jew, I could, but it doesn't mean it's a good thing. It just festers inside. That's all it does. right? It makes a person worse because they think about it too much. And what the person did or what they said, and I'm never going to let that person, I'm never going to give them the time of day, and whatever. I'll never let them, anyone says something good about them, you'll trash them, even if it doesn't make sense, you trash them anyway. You gotta, because you're angry. Okay, so bearing a grudge is forbidden in general. Yeah, and what if someone caused someone trauma? That's a different issue, right? We're not talking about that. In general, bear a grudge. You want to borrow someone's lawnmower, they won't allow you to do it, so you have it against them. You have it against them. You needed it. They had it, so why didn't they give it to you? You bear a grudge. Or, even worse, you take revenge. They now come to you. You have a lawnmower now, they come to you, theirs is broken. You say, no, I'm not going to give it to you because you didn't give it to me. That's taking revenge, right? That's forbidden. You might be justified, but it's forbidden. Yeah, but you got to see the bigger picture. Okay. So even if the person wouldn't do it for you, you got an obligation to do it for them unless you think they're going to damage it, realistically. If they don't damage things, good, they don't have to give it to them. Yeah, I can say, no, I don't have it or whatever, right? But if they normally don't and they're pretty responsible, then you're obligated to. It's a big test, right? If a person walking on the way and they see two donkeys crouched, yeah, and they're suffering, right? Now, they're suffering. Who do you go help first? One of them belongs to, your best friend from childhood, like 30 years. The other person, somebody you can't stand. Yeah, somebody you really can't stand. Even if it's legitimate, then you can't stand them. You can't stand them, right? Who do you have to help first? What would the obvious answer be? Person you've been friends 30 years, of course you're going to help them first. You've done things for them, they've done things for you, you've been friends for 30 years. Makes perfect sense. comes on the Gemara and says, no, you got to help the one that you don't like. Why? Goes against logic. Absolutely goes against logic. What's the logic? What is the logic here? Because if you help someone you don't like, it's going to help you overcome your evil inclination of hatred. So you should help somebody, even if you don't like them, maybe that'll, bridge the gap a little bit. Because hey, doesn't go according to nature. My nature would say I'm going to help this person that I've been friends with for 30 years. That makes sense. Overcoming your evil inclination is important. To the extent you help somebody, even if you don't like them, more, and you have more of an obligation to help them than help someone that you've been friends with 30 years. Because that's how far it goes to overcome bad feelings. Right? Someone's going to ask, but did God give the Torah to Malchei Sharis? Did God give the Torah to angels? He didn't give the angels. We're humans. God obviously thinks we have the ability to overcome these things. Yeah, it's not easy. Definitely not easy. But at the end of the day, how much of a martyr does the person have to be? Right? That's really the fundamental question. How far do you have to go? So again, it depends on the situation. Depends on the situation. Yeah, the problem is we're biased. This person said this person did that. We're biased. Right? And people will say, and again, I'm not the only one. I'm sure many people have heard this in family situations. Regardless of what this person did, you have to be the bigger person. And the person's going to want to select the person. Why do I have to be the bigger person? This person's this, that, and the other thing. Even if it's legit. I mean, I have to be friends with them. I have to hang out with them. Now, in certain cases, for family harmony, person should, if possible. If possible. Now, there are things we'll do, maybe we have to do, and we're going to resent it. Because you'll say, well, the other person never do it for me, so why should I do it for them? But some people, for family matters, it's crucial. Nothing's going to come out of it except for the fact you're going to keep family peace. It is worth something. Again, I'm not saying in every situation. Yeah, if a person can make family peace, beautiful. If you can't, you know, everyone's got someone in the family like walked off the deep end, so to speak, and they don't have anything to do with anyone, and more of a I would say a recluse or something. You have some people like that, resent other people for things might have been done, years before, and they just like tune to the beat of a different drummer. They do well. Like, what can you do? Like, the brother doesn't speak to anybody, so what should we do? So then you can't expect anything. For sake of family peace, there is no peace. So move on. Nothing. You can't do anything with such a person. Okay, that's when you know you can't do anything. Yeah, but sometimes we put in positions where sometimes you have to do something even if you don't like it. Even if you don't like it. Even if someone else would do it for you. You know what? It can bring tremendous peace for other people. Again, I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm definitely not going to say it's easy. I've been in those situations. Yeah. There were times I'd give in to certain things that, yeah, I wasn't happy. For sure wasn't happy. Yeah, and I made very clear that, if something like this happens again, it's not going to happen. Yeah. Like, don't invite me. Don't have me come. Whatever. Like, it's just not going to happen. Sometimes you get stuck. Sometimes, yeah, you may not have a choice. Sometimes. Okay. Right. But for some people, the fact that a person shows their face is worth billions. To that person, sometimes you can't do it. I'm not saying every situation. Just because that's the case, you have to do it. But in general, family peace is not a small thing. It's definitely not a small thing. Yeah. Someone was telling me a story, about someone becomes religious to get married, and the father's a reform rabbi. Yeah. He's a reform rabbi, conservative rabbi. I didn't really remember the story. Thought it was a reform rabbi. Can you give him a blessing under the chuppah? Are you allowed to give them a blessing? Right? To say a blessing, say God's name. So open the obvious answer. No. Of course you can't give him a blessing. Yeah. It's not just the father. The father's a reform rabbi. Yeah. So it's worse. It's a lot worse. Because they're heretics. They're absolute heretics. They don't believe in God, right? Most likely. So it's a blessing in vain at best. Or maybe it's not even a blessing. I don't know. Whatever. But they're saying God's name, certainly in vain. How can you give him a blessing? How can you give him a blessing? Well, someone told me in such a situation, the rabbi said, okay, you have to give him the blessing. Now again, reform rabbi, I can't imagine. It was a conservative rabbi, maybe a little bit better. Whatever, we had this whole discussion. I was at a kiddush, so whatever. Had this whole discussion with somebody. Whatever, involved in Jewish outreach for many years. For many, many years, teaching Bali Tshuva. And whatever, in some cases that would be all right, according to this. Yeah, others may say, can't, you can't give an honor. And what do you do if you can't give a person an honor? You can't give it. A personal thing. If they deny God, why use God's name? Like, I mean, yeah, you can use the argument. It's not gonna end well, right? I deserve it, and I'm the grandfather, and I'm this, and I'm that, and I deserve the honor. Okay, but you have to be a heretic. I can't get. I'd love to give you the honor. Can't give you the honor. Yeah, you give them other honors, maybe. Right? I think that actually wasn't ceremony. I think it was actually by Chevrolet, by one of the nights of these festive meals, where you say a whole bunch of blessings at the end of the meal. I think it was that one. I think this rabbi held that the chub itself, no, you can't give him a blessing. Question is, by one of the Chevrolet, can you give him a blessing? Right by the end of the meal, not under the chuppah. So how do you say you're probably allowed to? Is that maybe it's a conservative rabbi didn't remember? Like, I mean, this will be a tremendous leniency, especially anyone associated with the reform movement, whether they know anything or not. There goes uproot Torah mitzvahs. How could you honor somebody like that, even if they don't know anything? Yeah, whatever. It's not so simple. Why are these questions not so simple, right? In general, but you see, person asks such a question because you have to ask the question. But you see, the person you're asking the question to has sensitivity. They have sensitivity to family. you snub that family member. I mean, it's a serious snub, 100%. It's a serious snub. Sometimes you'll say there's nothing to do, right? Sometimes you're in situations you can't do anything about, right? Right? Many of my cases, and use me myself as an example, many of my cases, only the question how much you're going to get yelled at. Yeah, so I'm already used to it. Yeah, I come out smelling like a rose in many ways. Yeah, I did what my rabbi told me to do. Yeah, usually. Usually. Yeah, but I come out smelling like a rose. I did what I had to do. It has a lot of complex questions. Complex questions. I said, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? I mean, these are like, like you grasp me at straws, right? For the sake of family harmony. Yeah, they weren't easy questions. Yeah, they certainly weren't. There's certain things I had to do. I wasn't happy about doing, but sometimes I had no choice. But after certain things happen, just said, okay, next time along, don't invite me. Like, we're not coming. Like, that's it. Yeah, this is a fiasco. I had to do what I had to do. Okay. You know, listen, a person may have to do things, even if really you're grasping, like, at the bottom of the barrel. And no one in their right mind would ever rely on such a leniency, but could be. You're allowed to rely on this leniency for the sake of peace. Again, it depends what it is. Honestly, it depends what it is. Yeah. Would that mean, a Jew could go, if they have a sibling married a non-Jew, could they go? No. Let's say they don't go to the ceremony, but they show up at the reception. Can they go? No. Not around. Like that, there's no way around. Certain things, there's no way around. They know what they do. People are going to get offended? Oh, yeah. They'll get offended. But, if there are a way around things, many times look for permissibility in certain things. If there's ways around it. If there's no way around it, there's no way around it. But my rabbi is now the greatest rabbi generation, nothing to talk about. Sometimes I found ways around things. He found me ways around things. Other times he said, no, it's nothing to do. I said, okay, you got a good advice before I get slaughtered and I open my mouth, like, to say something? You have good advice for me? You know what to tell them? Whatever. A lot of times that thing was, I'll get back to you on that. What to say, how to say it. Sometimes you say the right thing, but it doesn't come out the right way, whatever. I mean, whatever, all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. I write a book on that just by itself. Just by itself. Being put in situations where there's nothing to do. Right, in many cases. Or you're in a situation where you don't want to do it. So leniency you could rely on. You could rely on certain circumstances, but you don't want to. And what's the reason you don't want to? Because they don't respect it. That's another issue. Yeah. They'll just say, of course it's family, you have to go. This is what you have to do. Well, that's so simple. I think this is the whole problem. See, Torah's always related, right? This is the whole problem, is that you're disrespected, right? They disrespect you. They don't care what you believe in. They don't, you're the fanatic. You're the one that changed or whatever. So now you have to turn the Torah into a pretzel to fit them. Yeah. Why? Why? They don't respect it. What do they say? This is what you have to do. This is what, this is what we're doing. Whatever. You want to see what God has to say on the subject? What the rabbis say on the subject? They don't care. It's denigrating. It's denigrating. Now, what happens even if it's denigrating, but there is permissibility? Isn't family peace worth it? Should be. Isn't that going to make a person mad? It's going to make a person mad at the same time. Right? But again, what's the reason? See, if there would be mutual respect, okay. Someone's like, listen, we understand it's really hard. It's not something you want to do, whatever. But hey, there's a leniency. Your rabbi says there's a leniency, so you have to do it. Like, that doesn't make you feel so good. I can tell you it doesn't make you feel so good. But at the end of the day, I mean, they're right to a point. Right? But a person can say, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I don't care what he said. I'm not doing it. Because you're being denigrated. They're walking on you like a doormat. Yeah, turning everything you hold sacred into a pretzel. You know what? Sometimes it's what you have to do. But it's not only that. It's not only that. You got to do it with a smile. You got to do it with like, this is the best thing that ever happened in your life. You got to be almost like the life of the party. Now, that's kind of hard, even for me. Right? I'm not good at faking things. Sometimes. Sometimes. But, when you get caught, it's bad. Yeah. So, anyway, we get in situations where, or potential situations where, what other people think. The problem is there's no one to talk to. They don't understand the gravity of the situation, which they really don't care, right? In general, they don't care. And you're the one that changed. And you have to make accommodations. Right? And they don't think it's such a big accommodation. Okay? Talking about someone doesn't know anything about Torah mitzvahs, yeah, to them it's not an accommodation. They don't know. Right? But what do we want? What do people want in general? As we said before, people want to be accepted. That's what they want. Now, does that mean in any, in no uncertain term, I have to do whatever it takes to be accepted? If they don't accept me, just throw them out? There has to be some sort of a balance. Yeah, because the person's going to feel threatened. They just want to be told what they do is okay. And that they're okay. They don't want anyone telling them doing anything wrong. Right? The same thing we said before. Haman has a lot of power. Right? The story of Esther, tremendous amount of power, tremendous amount of wealth. Right? Everyone bows down to him wherever he walks. Right? A lot of people didn't like him for that. Every time they walked in the room, boom, had to bow, get on the floor. Walks out of the room, comes back, they have to be on the floor. One person refused to bow. Yeah. His name was Mordechai Yud. Right? Mordechai the Jew. He wouldn't bow. So he gets so upset. He says, not only going to kill him, they're going to kill his entire people. I'm going to kill the entire nation. Achashverosh let them do it. Or potentially let them do it. He's got unbelievable power and wealth. One Jew won't bow. And he says, my whole life is worth nothing if this Jew doesn't bow. Why? You have 50 billion other people that are going to bow every second and show him that he's God's gift to the world. Yeah, he's got an ego the size of the universe. Yeah, one Jew's not going to bow, so who cares? So he won't bow. Stubborn idiot. Yeah, he won't bow. But he knows the truth. He knows deep down he's nothing. He knows deep down it's all garbage. He knows the truth. So everyone else knows the truth also. They won't admit it. But they know the truth. Why do you think secular Jews are going to make fun of Orthodox Jews so much? Well, they know the truth. They want to say, I'm just as good. Even if I don't keep this and that. Oh, you think you're better than me. You think you're more Jewish. No. This is the obligation. If your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. Not a problem. Yeah. It's not an obligation. You don't want to do it. Okay, it's your choice. Yeah, it's your choice. Either you believe the Torah is true or it's not true. And if it's not true, if it is true, there are repercussions. So just know what you're doing is wrong. Someone once said to me, oh, you think these people are living in sin? I said, yes. Well, so does me. That's what the Torah says. It's forbidden. Maybe Torah obligation. Maybe death penalty. I don't want to hear that. That conversation didn't go that far. It only went as far as I said, you think they're living in sin? Yes. 100%. That's it. That was the end of the conversation. Yeah, it's wrong. I think it's wrong. You want to know why? No. Okay. I always love this conversation. It's short and sweet. There's guilt. They know what the truth is. Every Jew has that spark. We call it just the Pintelig. They have the spark. They know it's true. And they'll give Webster's 8 definition, tell you why they're allowed to do this, they're allowed to do that, they're allowed to do other things. They know deep down. They know deep down. But they can't admit it. They'll never admit it. Because that means their whole life is a travesty of a mockery of a sham. Yeah, they'll never admit it. But sometimes you hear things You hear things through other people. Yeah, a friend of mine once told me he heard something, became religious, whatever, religious many years, big family, whatever. And, he heard it through other people, as parents, when they speak about the grandkids, they always speak about his kids. There are other siblings that are married, and have kids. But the parents that never really speak about the other kids, they always speak about his kids. But they never tell him that. They never tell this son that. But he heard it through somebody else. Now, why couldn't he tell his son that? Because obviously they're doing something right. They don't attribute it to Torah, but they're doing something right. And these children are more special to him than the others. Why? They see. They see how they treat them. They see how, religious kids treat their parents, treat their grandparents. Like they're sacred. Like someone told me they, one of the grandkids, with one of the grandparents. Like, come on, like, why are you moving so slow? It's like in the mid-80s. They're like, why are you walking so slow? Come on, you gotta keep up. So somebody said, another grandkid said, come on, they don't have a clue. They say that to an older person. What, come on, come on, what are you walking so slow? What are you old? That's condescending. Tremendously condescending. And I'm sure this happens a lot. I'm sure it's not like an isolated incident. They don't treat grandparents the way they should. All right, come on, grandma, you're too old, you can't walk, come on. That's degrading. Yeah, why can't they walk so well? Because they're old. They got issues. It's what happens when a person gets old. They might not walk so fast. If they're lucky, if they can walk, okay. It's degrading. You never hear an Orthodox Jew say that, a grandchild say about a grandparent? Parent would slap them upside the head if they did. They should. Not saying literally. It's degrading. Degrading to a grandparent. Oh, come on, let's see you move. Come on, you can't move so fast, why not? You can't keep up? It's degrading. Yeah? Torah education's different. Very, very different. You honor grandparents as much as you can. As much as you can. Get them this, get them that. You wait on them hand and foot because they deserve, they're the link in the chain. Go back to Mount Sinai. I don't talk about if they're evil, whatever. In general, it's a whole different thing. They'll never admit 100% has to do with Torah. They'll never say it. But that's where it comes from. It's ingrained in their head from when they were little kids. About the sacred command of honoring parents. It's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard mitzvah to do. Yeah, in general. Secular people, they treat parents and grandparents. Treat them like dogs. Different way. Yeah. Treat them with proper respect. I'm not saying everybody. But I mean, it's horrific. The Torah emphasizes their eretz. Proper character traits. Yeah, you weren't muster for this. You're schmoozing on this. Okay. But it's ingrained in a person's head from when they're younger. Like, this is how you talk to parents? You know how you talk to grandparents? Are you off your cotton picking head? That's chutzpah. And that's being nice. That's being nice. But they wouldn't have a clue. You tell that person that was chutzpah to talk to your grandmother like that. Are you kidding? They're going to say, why? They're going to say, I called the spade a spade. They're moving too slow. We need to move. We need to get somewhere. Yeah, so they need to keep pace. Person's 60 years older than you, you bonehead. 60 years older, what do you expect? What do you think? You expect them to run a marathon? Yeah, I mean, there are people that, in their 80s could probably run a marathon. Some people, okay. Most people, they ain't moving so fast. How can you expect such a thing? And if you don't expect such a thing, how can you say it? That's degrading. Someone that's close to that link in the chain, that's degrading. We want our grandparents' best for our ability. And honor parents. But that's ingrained in them from their kids. Should be ingrained in them. I mean, it is. You see how they treat parents and grandparents. It's a whole different world. It's a whole different world. Now try to explain to someone that. They'll think you're crazy. All right, that wasn't disrespectful. are just telling the truth. They're moving slow. Now they got a point, right? That might be true. So what? Yeah. But don't you think like they're a little bit older? You gotta take your time with them. You can't just like run. They're old. Right? Again, depends on the age. Or whatever, but you can't expect that. Or to say it like it's crazy. Yeah, my Rebbe and his mother many years ago. His mother came to Israel to visit. They're on a bus. They're on a bus and they heard a teenage kid, secular Israeli kid, saying, "My father's a donkey." Like his mother, my Rebbe's mother almost fainted. Fainted! Couldn't believe a child speak about a parent like that. Speak about a parent like that. Even the parent wasn't so good and this and that. Call him a donkey? Like, seriously? Again, it's like your world. Like, what's the big deal? So, yeah, they're kind of stubborn like a donkey. So call him a donkey. Like, they wouldn't think twice. They wouldn't think twice. But there's human dignity, right? This is what the Torah is telling you. When you give over yourself, as it says, back to our topic here, it talks about going in the ways of the Egyptians. And you're giving in to bodily pleasure, you're no different than an animal. That's why it's so bad. That's why the influence is so bad. Yeah, that's exactly what Ezekiel says. But if you don't have Torah as a guide, what are you? You're no different than an animal. Why are you any different? You say things, you do things, they're no different. Right? Here's talking about something very specific. Yeah. And a person will give in that base desire and they'll just do it all the time. That's why it's bad. Right? That's exactly why it's bad. Yeah. So the Torah warns. Right? We'll see the Kuyakar, I guess, next week. Right? The Torah warns. Don't go in their actions. Their actions are worse. Their actions are worse. But God obviously put them in Egypt for a reason. Nonetheless, being part of them, don't go in their ways. Because their ways are worse than anyone else. And that's going to destroy you spiritually. And it's true. Anyone has these type of addictions. Yeah. You feed it as much as you feed it, guess what? I'm not going to say impossible to change. It's going to be very hard to change. Very hard to change. There are psychologists out there that can help gay people. Yeah, it can certainly help them. But if a person, anything a person does too much, very hard to change. Or by food, by drink, by these type of things, by immorality, very hard to change. Very hard to totally operate. It's not impossible to. But if you feed it, too much, what happens? You're addicted. Very easily addicted. Right? And and this is something like you tell me, oh, it's like eating bran, or it's like eating seaweed. No! This is one of the greatest urges God gave, of course. You think a person's going to enjoy it? Not going to enjoy it. Why not? The greatest urge God gave. But he said, okay, within reason. And when a person's, wife is permissible, he's talking about a Jew. Right? But even if she's permissible, that means the person's supposed to be, together every second of every day. Right? Doesn't mean you can't have enjoyment. You can have enjoyment, but you have to know how to do it. And this is well beyond. This is why they compare it to animals. Right? Again, something totally taken out of context. People look at that verse and say, oh, look, they compare the semen to horses, to donkeys, this, that. Why? Why? Because they're overactive in it and they're no different than them. It doesn't differentiate them between themselves and animals. Because animals do whatever they want. Yeah? There don't have repercussions. They do whatever they want. So a person can think I can do whatever I want. Yeah? Yeah, but what's the Torah telling you? No. You have to restrain. You're not allowed to go in their ways. Right? Not just in physical things. Right? Not just in immoral things here. Right? Rashi said before, even going to their stadiums and going to their games and all that. Because that also has a negative effect. Right? You say immorality is worse. Good. Right? Many ways it is. Right? Death penalty, other things. Yeah, for sure it's worse. Some things also have influence. What we see has influence. what we do as what we see around us has influence. Even if we don't act on it, doesn't matter. It's there. We see it. We hear it. Right? So we have to stay away from all these things. Right? Because of the negative effect. Yeah, I am going. Let me see if there are questions here. No questions here. So I think I'm going to stop here. I want to thank everyone for coming to this therapy session. I hope it was good for everyone as well as for me. Yeah, so I just every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Mike Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I can videos, Q&As, Ethics of Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. Anyone has any questions, send me an email at MikeChaimKaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIM, COFFMAN@gmail.com. Wish everyone a good beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day.